If you saw a desperate animal begging for help, would you risk everything to save it? Why does it matter? Because sometimes caring for another is the very thing that changes your own life. Emily Carter drove with her window cracked, the Vermont air thick with the smell of wet earth and summer grass. She glanced at the dashboard clock, 7:08 p.m., and watched the last gold-pink rays slipping away behind the tree line. The two-lane country road stretched empty, flanked by rolling fields and clusters of shadowy pines. It had been almost a month since the divorce finalized, but the silence riding in the passenger seat still pressed in on her, heavier than any luggage she'd ever hauled. She hummed a tune, half-hearted just to break the hush, and then she saw him. A dark shape bolted from the underbrush up ahead, veering toward the road and freezing beneath her headlights. Emily hit the brakes, heart slamming, gravel crunching under her tires as she skidded to a stop. For a split second, everything was still. The figure, a large, filthy German shepherd, stood in the beam, sides heaving. His fur was matted with mud, bristling around his shoulders, and his eyes were wild with terror. There was something desperate, pleading in his posture, and Emily could swear he was trying to make himself understood. She watched, heart pounding. Maybe he belonged to someone up the road. Maybe he was just lost. She almost pulled away, almost, but then he did something she'd never seen a dog do. He trotted directly to her door, whining, and pressed his nose hard against the glass, pawing frantically. Emily rolled the window down, just an inch. "Hey, buddy, are you lost?" Her voice trembled. She scanned the darkness, half expecting someone to step out of the trees, to claim him. But there was only silence. The dog let out a low, urgent whimper, then grabbed the sleeve of her jacket in his teeth, gentle but insistent. Emily froze. Every childhood warning about strange dogs, about rabies and bites, ran through her head. But this wasn't a threat. His eyes were pleading, searching hers. He released her jacket, then turned and looked back toward the woods, taking a few steps, pausing, looking back again. She could have driven away. No one would have blamed her. But loneliness had a way of sharpening your sense of what mattered. The ache inside her, old griefs, fresh heartbreak, met the animal's desperation like two lost things colliding in the dark. Against every instinct, Emily got out of the car. It was quieter than she'd realized. Even the crickets seemed to pause as she followed the dog off the shoulder, down a narrow path trampled into the grass. Her shoes sank into mud. Branches slapped her arms, tugged her hair. The dog, she would later learn his name was Max, kept glancing back, making sure she followed. The woods grew thick, shadows closing in. Emily's mind raced. What if this was a trap? People had vanished in places like this. Headlines warned about it all the time. But something deeper, maybe hope, maybe a need to believe she could do one good thing, kept her moving. Suddenly, Max stopped and whined, ears pricked toward a shape in the gloom. A derelict shed slumped among the trees, its wood rotting and roof half collapsed. The smell hit her first. Old straw, blood, and something far worse. Sickly, hopeless. Emily hesitated, heart rattling in her chest. But Max pawed at the door, barking sharply, then darted inside through a gap. She drew a shaky breath, pulled her phone out, no service, and used its flashlight to cut through the shadows. Inside, the scene was chaos. Broken cages, dirty blankets, and piles of moldy food scattered across the floor. And there, huddled in the farthest corner, 3 tiny puppies, skeletal, trembling, their eyes huge in the light. Max rushed to them, nosing each one, whining anxiously. Emily dropped to her knees, her heart splintering. One puppy didn't move at all. Another barely lifted its head. The third tried to bark, but only a thin, croaking sound came out. Emily's hands shook as she reached for them. Max licked her wrist, as if urging her to hurry. She gathered the puppies, tucking them into her jacket, cradling them to her chest. Max pressed close, eyes never leaving hers. The shed shuddered in a gust of wind, thunder rumbling outside. Emily's pulse hammered. She was no hero, just a woman who'd lost too much. But right now, these lives depended on her. She staggered out, nearly tripping on the threshold. Rain lashed the trees as she ran to her car, puppies squirming weakly in her arms. Max following at her heels, her hands fumbled with the keys, slamming the door, shoving the shivering bundle into the passenger seat. "Hang on, please, just hang on," she whispered, voice breaking. She wrapped the puppies in an old sweater, clicked on the heater, and Max jumped into the back, whining anxiously. Emily wiped rain from her eyes, twisted the ignition, and floored the gas, fishtailing back onto the road. No cell service. Nearest town was nearly 15 miles away, but Emily drove like she was being chased, by regret, by time, by every nightmare she'd ever feared. Rain hammered the windshield, wipers screeching. She clung to the steering wheel, glancing over at the limp little bodies, at Max's wild, desperate face. As the miles flew by, Emily caught herself whispering prayers, first for the puppies, then for herself. Why had she stopped? Why did it matter? In the roar of the storm and the sobs she barely controlled, Emily realized, sometimes the choice to care is the only thing that makes us human. And as the town's lights finally blinked through the downpour, Emily gripped the wheel tighter, refusing to let go. Of hope of the puppies, of her own second chance. The rain slammed harder as Emily's little sedan tore through the winding country road. The puppies huddled in her lap, so fragile and cold that every breath they took seemed a tiny miracle. Max, the German shepherd who'd started all this, paced in the back seat, his nose pressed against the window, eyes locked on the storm outside. Emily kept glancing at the clock on her dash, counting the minutes, her mind racing with questions. Was she too late? Did she even know what she was doing? She shook herself, focusing on the road. Trees blurred past. Her phone still showed no service, a taunting reminder that out here she was on her own. The nearest animal hospital was at least 15 miles away, down twisting roads and over the river, but turning back was not an option. Every few moments, she'd reach over, feeling for a heartbeat, the heat of puppy breath, desperate for any sign of life. In the back, Max whined, occasionally letting out a soft bark as if to urge her on. Thunder cracked directly overhead as she screeched into the gravel parking lot of the veterinary hospital. The sign glowed pale blue in the night. Green Mountain Animal Clinic, 24 hours, a tiny oasis in a world gone dark. Emily slammed the car into park, snatched up the bundle of puppies, and flung open the door. Max lunged out behind her, almost knocking her over, but she caught his collar, guiding him up the slippery walkway. Inside, fluorescent lights flickered, and the scent of antiseptic filled her nose. A young woman at the front desk, dark hair and a messy bun, pink scrubs, jumped up at the sight of Emily, dripping wet, clutching the limp bodies. "Help! Please, they're barely breathing!" Emily gasped, her voice cracking. Max barked sharply, drawing the attention of everyone in the waiting room. The receptionist's face shifted from surprise to determination in a heartbeat. She snatched up the phone, yelling over her shoulder, "Dr. Taylor, emergency! Puppies, critical condition!" Moments later, a tall, broad-shouldered man in a white coat came barreling through the doors. His face, tired but kind, took in the scene instantly. "Here, come with me. Let's move." Emily followed, clutching the puppies with Max at her heels, into the brightly lit exam room. The doctor quickly motioned her to lay the puppies down on a stainless steel table. As he examined them, his expression tightened. 3. One's already gone, he said softly. Let's see about these 2. What happened? Emily tried to speak, but her voice caught. I found them in a shed, abandoned. Max, he led me there. I don't know how long they've been without food or water. Please just save them. Dr. Taylor nodded grimly. We'll do everything we can. He handed one limp puppy to the nurse and began working on the other, checking pulse, breathing, temperature. Max refused to leave the table, pressing his head against Emily's thigh, watching every move with wide, anxious eyes. A second nurse appeared, setting up IV fluids and warming blankets. They're ice cold, she muttered, wrapping the smallest puppy. Emily hovered beside them, hands shaking, helpless but refusing to look away. She remembered her own mother's hands, steady and gentle, when she was small and sick, and felt tears prick at her eyes. Hang on, she whispered to the puppies. Please, just hang on. Minutes dragged into what felt like hours. The smallest puppy was barely moving, its chest fluttering with shallow breaths. The other whimpered weakly, a sound so heartbreakingly tiny that it broke something inside Emily. Dr. Taylor worked silently, brow furrowed, as the nurse monitored the puppy's heart rates. Suddenly, the monitor flatlined, a sharp, shrill beep. No, 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 Emily murmured, her hands flying to her mouth. Dr. Taylor began CPR, tiny compressions, then gentle breaths, over and over. The nurse rubbed the puppy's chest, whispering encouragement. Max let out a mournful howl, low and raw, echoing through the empty clinic. Emily couldn't move. It was as if time had stopped, and all the pain and loneliness she'd been carrying came pouring out. She leaned over, her tears wetting the puppy's fur, and whispered, "You're not alone. I'm here. Please come back. You can do it." There was a long moment of silence, broken only by the storm pounding outside and the frantic activity in the room. Then, impossibly, the tiniest pup's paw twitched. The nurse gasped. Dr. Taylor didn't stop, didn't dare to hope. He just kept working, relentless, focused. Another twitch, a faint, thin squeak. The monitor blipped, once, then again. The nurse looked at Dr. Taylor, her eyes wide with amazement. "He's back," she whispered. "He's really back." Emily felt her knees give way and caught herself on the edge of the table. She wanted to laugh, to cry, to scream all at once. Max, sensing the change, let out a bark, a sound of triumph and relief. He pressed his nose to Emily's palm, tail wagging tentatively. Dr. Taylor leaned back, wiping sweat from his brow. "That's one tough little fighter," he said, smiling at last. "But they're not out of the woods yet. We'll need to keep them on fluids, keep them warm. It's going to be a long night." Emily nodded fiercely. "Whatever it takes. I'll do anything. Just keep them together, please." He met her gaze and saw something unbreakable there. "We will, I promise. You saved them tonight, you know." Emily shook her head. "Max did. I just listened." Max wagged his tail again, eyes shining with hope for the first time. The rest of the night was a blur of waiting, watching, and whispered encouragements. Emily refused to leave the exam room, sitting on the hard plastic chair with Max curled at her feet. She cradled the puppies, feeding them drops of formula with trembling hands, never once looking away from their tiny faces. Outside, the storm finally passed, leaving only the quiet hum of machines and the rhythmic breathing of sleeping animals. As dawn crept in, painting the sky with streaks of silver and rose, Dr. Taylor stepped in quietly. They made it through the night. It's going to be a long road, but they're fighters. Emily felt something shift inside her, a fierce, determined hope. She looked at Max, at the puppies nestled together, and knew she couldn't walk away. I'm not giving up on them. We're a team now. The sun rose over Vermont, illuminating a new family, broken, battered, but alive, and ready to fight for a second chance. Morning light filtered through the narrow windows of Green Mountain Animal Clinic, splashing long golden stripes across the exam room floor. Emily blinked, stiff and sore from sitting up all night. But the exhaustion felt different now. Less like defeat, more like the aftermath of a battle narrowly won. The two surviving puppies were nestled together on a thick towel inside a plastic tub, tiny bodies trembling as they fought for every breath. The third puppy, the smallest one Dr. Taylor had fought so desperately to revive, lay apart, limbs twitching, eyes barely open. Max stood guard beside the makeshift bed, his nose hovering inches from the puppies. He paced in small circles, whining if Emily moved too far, refusing to leave the room even when the nurses tried to coax him away. It was as if he'd appointed himself the guardian of this fragile new family. Dr. Taylor entered, his white coat rumpled, stethoscope still hanging from his neck, but there was a hint of a smile on his tired face. He knelt beside Emily, checking the IV drip on the smallest pup. "Good news," he murmured. "She made it through the night. It's a miracle, honestly. But she's still touch and go. The other two are stronger, but they're not out of the woods yet." Emily nodded, rubbing her eyes. "What should I do?" Dr. Taylor glanced at Max, who leaned into Emily, tail brushing her arm. "Right now, just stay close. Let them feel you here. That's as important as any medicine." As the morning wore on, the clinic buzzed with the soft shuffle of staff, the hum of machines, and the distant sound of a cat yowling from an exam room down the hall. Emily learned to help, warming formula, holding the smallest puppy upright so she wouldn't choke while eating, changing soiled towels. The work was delicate and slow, and sometimes her hands shook, but the rhythm soothed her frayed nerves. She watched Max carefully. Every time a door slammed or a metal tray clattered, he would flinch, eyes darting, hackles rising. Yet he never lashed out, just whined softly and pressed closer to the puppies. Once, when Dr. Taylor reached out suddenly, Max bared his teeth in warning, but Emily put her hand on his neck and he calmed, trembling but trusting. The smallest puppy, the one who had almost slipped away, faded in and out of sleep. Her breaths were shallow, her heart rate alarmingly slow. Every few minutes the monitor would beep erratically, and Emily's chest would tighten. She whispered to the limp bundle, "Come on, little one. Stay with us. You're safe now, I promise." She couldn't remember the last time she'd begged this hard for anything, not even for herself during the worst nights of the divorce. Dr. Taylor hovered close, fingers gentle but firm. At one point, the puppy's pulse stuttered, the monitor wailed, and Emily's heart lurched. Dr. Taylor started chest compressions again, counting under his breath. Emily held the puppy's paw, tears streaming down her face. Max whined louder, nose pressed to the table, as if urging the puppy not to let go. Minutes stretched into eternity. Emily's world narrowed to the rise and fall of that tiny chest. The flutter of eyelids, the quiver of a paw. She whispered encouragement, promising anything, everything, her time, her love, her very soul, if it meant the puppy would live. At last, the monitor blipped, once, twice, then steadier. The puppy twitched, a weak squeak rising from her throat. Emily sobbed, laughter and relief mixing until she could barely breathe. Dr. Taylor let out a long sigh, shoulders slumping. "She's a fighter," he said quietly. "So are you." Emily glanced at Max. The big dog's eyes were shining, hopeful but wary, like he didn't dare believe things might turn out okay. She stroked his head, murmuring, "We're in this together, Max. I won't leave you, I swear." After the adrenaline faded, the reality of what she'd promised began to settle in. The puppies would need around-the-clock care. Formula every 2 hours, cleaning, comforting, monitoring for any sign of infection. Emily had never raised a puppy before. She'd barely managed to keep a houseplant alive during her marriage. But as she sat on the cool tile floor, exhaustion pulling at her, she realized she was determined to learn. A nurse brought in coffee and a croissant from a bakery down the street. "You need to eat too," she said, her voice kind but firm. Emily accepted gratefully, wolfing it down as she watched Dr. Taylor examine the puppies one by one. Max refused to leave the room, growling softly if anyone tried to usher him away. He kept his distance from strangers, but pressed close to Emily, eyes never leaving the puppies. Once Emily dozed off in the chair, only to wake to the sensation of Max's head in her lap, as if he'd appointed himself her guardian too. As afternoon crept in, Emily's phone finally buzzed. 1 bar of service. She ignored the missed calls from her ex-husband, her heart focusing entirely on the fragile lives in her care. When Dr. Taylor returned, he handed her a sheet of paper covered in notes. Feeding instructions, emergency numbers, warning signs. "I want you to take them home tonight," he said. "It'll be less stressful for Max. And honestly, they need a quiet place, not a clinic full of barking dogs and beeping monitors." Emily stared at the puppies, at Max, at the little ecosystem they'd created together in this sterile room. "All of them? Together?" Dr. Taylor smiled. "They're a family now. Keeping them together is their best chance." Emily nodded, a lump in her throat. "Then that's what I'll do. I'll keep them together, no matter what." The drive home was slow, careful, with Emily cradling the puppies and Max finally settling beside her in the back seat. She turned the radio low, soft folk music, and tried to breathe, fighting down 100 worries. When she finally pulled into her driveway, the sky had faded to lavender. Her house, once a fortress of loneliness, suddenly looked different, a place where hope, however fragile, might finally take root. Emily gathered the puppies, Max trailing so close his nose brushed her leg, and stepped inside. She didn't know what tomorrow would bring, or if she was strong enough to handle what came next. But as Max flopped at her feet and the puppies huddled together on her favorite blanket, Emily felt, for the first time in a long while, a flicker of something new and bright. A promise, unspoken but fierce. They would heal together, whatever it took. Emily's small blue clapboard house had never felt so full. As she carried the battered cardboard box containing the puppies inside, Max pressed close to her legs, tail low, muscles tense beneath his grimy fur. The air inside the living room was warm and tinged with the familiar scent of coffee and vanilla, but tonight it also held the heavy aroma of animal musk and antiseptic from the clinic. Emily set the box gently by the couch, grabbing an armful of old towels from the hall closet to fashion a soft bed for the tiny survivors. The puppies shivered in a tangle of legs and fur, their eyes blinking in confusion at the new world around them. Emily knelt beside them, her hands gentle but sure. She could feel Max's breath on her shoulder, hear the anxious panting as he paced the room. Never more than a few feet from the puppies. Every sharp sound, a neighbor's car door, the distant wail of a siren, made him flinch, his body coiling in readiness for disaster. "Easy, Max," Emily murmured, her voice soft and steady as she stroked his head. "You're safe here, all of you. I promise." She thought about all the promises she'd made and broken in her life. To friends, to family, even to herself. This time she felt the weight of it like an anchor. There would be no walking away from these fragile lives. She fetched a battered basket, her late father's old fishing basket, the handle still wrapped with faded green tape, and filled it with warm towels. One by one, she lifted the puppies in, settling them close together so their tiny bodies would share heat. Max crept closer, nose twitching, eyes flicking from the basket to Emily, searching for reassurance. Emily sat on the floor, legs crossed, and reached for the drawer where she kept keepsakes, photos, postcards, and a handful of her father's handkerchiefs and old bandanas. She pulled out a navy blue bandana, the fabric soft from years of washing, and looped it gently around Max's neck. "This was my dad's," she whispered, tying a careful knot. "He always said it meant you were part of the family." Max stiffened as she tied the bandana, his breath quick and shallow. But when her hands dropped away, he froze, then inched forward, pressing his head into her lap. Emily stroked his ears, feeling him relax for the first time since they'd left the woods. She looked into his eyes and saw the haunted look there, a flicker of gratitude, of need, and of a pain she recognized all too well. They stayed like that for a long time. The only sounds, the quiet squeaks of the puppies and the rhythmic ticking of the kitchen clock. Emily talked quietly, not caring if her words made sense. She spoke of her childhood, her father teaching her to ride a bike, her failed marriage, and the ache of coming home to an empty house night after night. "You're not alone anymore," she said, her voice breaking just a little. "We're all a little lost, but maybe we can find our way together." Max's body finally uncoiled. He turned once, twice, and curled himself at her feet, laying his head across her ankle as if to say, "I trust you now, at least a little." As the night deepened, the house settled into uneasy peace. Emily made a nest for herself on the floor beside Max, the basket of puppies within arm's reach. She set her phone on vibrate, just in case Dr. Taylor called with more advice or in case of an emergency. But mostly she just watched them, memorizing the rise and fall of their tiny chests, the way Max's ears flicked at every new sound, the softness of the bandana against his fur. At 2 a.m., one puppy woke whining, a thin, pitiful sound. Emily gently warmed formula in a bottle, cradling the puppy against her chest as she fed him. Max rose and hovered, sniffing each puppy in turn as if to check their safety. His tail thumped uncertainly against the floor. Afterward, Emily lay back on the blanket and closed her eyes, letting exhaustion pull at her bones. But sleep didn't come easily. Her mind replayed the day's events in loops. The sight of the filthy shed, the dying puppies, the frantic drive through the storm. A surge of panic threatened to drag her under. But then she felt Max's weight, solid and warm against her side, and focused on the steady pulse of his breathing. A sudden crack of thunder made both Emily and Max jump. Max shot up, barking sharply, chest rumbling with panic. The puppies whimpered, and for a moment chaos reigned. Emily reached out, wrapping her arms around Max's neck, pulling him close. "It's okay, Max. It's just a storm. No one's coming. You're safe." Max's body quaked, his teeth bared, not in aggression, but in terror. Emily kept her grip gentle, her voice steady. She remembered how her father used to calm her after nightmares, rubbing her back in slow circles and humming softly. She tried the same with Max, humming the lullaby she barely remembered, until his breathing slowed and his body sagged against hers. When the storm faded, A hush fell over the room. Max kept his head pressed against Emily's knee, and she traced her fingers over the bandana again. A promise, a talisman, a reminder that sometimes family was made by choice, not by blood. For the first time since her life had fallen apart, Emily felt a flicker of something fragile but real, a sense of belonging, of connection, of hope. She listened to the quiet breathing of the puppies, the gentle sigh of Max asleep at her feet, and let herself believe, just for tonight, that maybe this broken little family could heal together. Outside, the storm clouds finally drifted on, and inside, in the dim glow of the living room lamp, Emily Carter and her newfound family found rest. The wounds of the past were still there, jagged and aching, but for now, wrapped in warmth and the promise of new beginnings, they slept. The sun rose reluctantly over Emily's house, its light softening the rough lines of the world after the long, sleepless night. Emily woke on the living room floor with a start, her neck aching from sleeping in a strange position. But the puppy's tiny yips pulled her awake. Max lay beside her, already alert, one ear cocked toward the window, always on guard. The old navy bandana she'd tied around his neck made him look almost dashing, though there was still a haunted edge to his amber eyes. Emily sat up and gently stretched, blinking at the transformation her living room had undergone overnight. Towels and blankets covered the floor, a makeshift den for the puppies. The air was alive with the faint, warm scent of puppy fur, and the once sterile silence of the house was replaced by the sound of small lives trying, clumsily, to find their way in the world. The first few days passed in a blur of routines and worry. Emily bottle-fed the puppies every 2 hours, day and night. She would cradle each one in her lap, coaxing them to drink, wiping dribbles from their chins with a washcloth. Their eyes grew brighter with each feeding, and their little legs became stronger. The smallest puppy, the one Dr. Taylor had almost lost, was still frail, but with each day she fought harder, surprising even Max with her stubborn will to live. Emily soon realized she couldn't do this alone. On the third morning, a gentle knock sounded at the door. She cracked it open to find Mrs. Harlow, her elderly neighbor, standing on the porch with a basket of muffins in hand. Her silvery hair was pulled into a neat bun, and her eyes sparkled with curiosity and concern. "I heard there was quite a commotion last night," Mrs. Harlow said with a kind smile. "And I saw that big dog out in your yard this morning. Need an extra pair of hands?" Emily felt relief rush through her. She invited Mrs. Harlow inside, offering her a cup of coffee and introducing her to Max, who eyed the visitor warily at first but slowly accepted a gentle pat on the head. Mrs. Harlow was a natural, her voice calm and soothing, her hands steady. She helped Emily clean the puppies, change their bedding, and even coaxed Max to eat a little breakfast by mixing some warm broth into his food. Word spread quickly in the small Vermont town. Later that afternoon, Lucas, a boy from down the street, showed up at the door. He was maybe 10, thin and quiet, his dark hair falling into his eyes. He shuffled his feet, clutching a tattered baseball glove. "My grandma said you got puppies," he mumbled. "Can I see 'em?" Emily hesitated, but the puppies were awake and yipping, so she nodded. Lucas dropped to his knees beside the basket, his face lighting up as one of the puppies licked his hand. The smallest, still weaker than the others, crawled into Lucas's lap and promptly fell asleep. Lucas didn't move for a long time, afraid to wake her. "Her name's Chance," he whispered, glancing up at Emily for approval. She smiled. "I think that's perfect." Each day brought new challenges and tiny victories. Emily set up a small fenced area in the backyard, using old lattice panels and garden stakes, so Max could explore without fear. At first, he would only creep a few feet from the porch, his body tense and ears pinned back. Loud noises, like the garbage truck or a neighbor's lawnmower, sent him scurrying inside. But the puppies gave him courage. They stumbled after him, tumbling over each other, barking in their squeaky voices, and Max would turn back to herd them away from the fence, his tail wagging ever so slightly. Emily tried to reintroduce Max to normal life slowly. She played soft music, read aloud while sitting on the porch, and brought home toys from the pet store. Max was especially wary of men, shying away whenever one walked past the yard or when the mailman dropped off a package. Sometimes he'd bark or growl, fur standing on end, but Emily never scolded him. Instead, she offered quiet reassurance, a gentle word, a treat, a hand resting on his shoulder until he calmed. One afternoon, as Emily sat in the sun with Mrs. Harlow and Lucas, the little community began to stitch itself together. Mrs. Harlow shared stories of the dogs she'd raised decades ago. Lucas, always patient with Chance, taught her to chase a little rubber ball, celebrating each clumsy attempt with a proud smile. Emily listened, feeling the old ache in her chest soften a bit with each passing day. The town's animal rescue community reached out too. Volunteers arrived with bags of puppy food, medicine, and blankets. One evening, Emily attended a meeting at the local church, where she nervously shared her story. The room was filled with people she barely knew, but as she spoke about Max and the puppies, the storm, the terror, the hope, they listened, nodding and offering support. Back at home, Emily's routines became rituals. She sang to the puppies as she fed them, laughter spilling out as they made a mess of themselves. She watched Max as he slowly, hesitantly began to play, first with a chew toy, then with the puppies, rolling on his back as they clambered over him. The sound of barking, once sharp with fear, became a backdrop to joy. Yet, there were setbacks. Max sometimes woke in the middle of the night, panting and shaking from nightmares. Emily would find him at the foot of her bed, his eyes wide and lost. She'd kneel down and speak softly, stroking his ears until his breathing slowed, and he settled beside her. The smallest puppy, Chance, was still prone to illness, her body not as strong as her siblings. Emily spent sleepless nights by her side, monitoring her breathing, feeling both helpless and fiercely determined. The puppies grew, as puppies do, faster than Emily was ready for. Their legs grew sturdy, their barks more confident. Chance, though always the smallest, was the bravest. First to climb out of the basket, first to bark at a passing squirrel, first to curl up with Max in the sun. The house filled with life. Muddy paw prints on the kitchen floor, shredded newspapers, the constant tumble of puppy chaos. For Emily, healing was slow and uncertain. Some days the loneliness crept back, a shadow in the corners of her mind. But every time she looked at Max, at the puppies she'd rescued, at the neighbor boy napping in the grass with Chance curled in his arms, she knew she was building something new, something better. This wasn't the life she'd planned. It was messier, louder, more exhausting than anything she'd known. But as she watched the sun set over the yard, Max and the puppies tangled together in a heap, Emily smiled, realizing she was exactly where she was meant to be, learning, day by day, what it meant to live and love again. Summer in Vermont had a way of making the evenings feel timeless, golden light spilling over the hills, fireflies blinking awake, the hush of small-town life settling over Emily's little house. By now, a month had passed since the night Emily rescued Max and the puppies. The days had become a rhythm, feeding and cleaning, playing and soothing, neighbors coming and going, Max gradually learning to trust the world beyond his nightmares. The small wounds, both human and canine, had begun to heal. But sometimes, healing was interrupted by a tremor of unease, a prickle on the back of the neck that reminded Emily the past wasn't so easily left behind. It started with little things. A black pickup she didn't recognize, idling across the street while she watered her garden. Max, usually content to bask in the sunlight, would suddenly stand rigid, his body tense, ears pinned flat. He'd bark at shadows, hackles raised, eyes darting toward the fence as if expecting someone, or something, to appear. Emily tried to brush it off at first. She told herself the truck was probably just lost, a contractor doing work in the area, or someone visiting a neighbor. But the feeling of being watched lingered. One evening, as she clipped leashes on the puppies for a walk, she glanced over her shoulder and caught a flicker of movement, just beyond the reach of the streetlight, the unmistakable glint of headlights slipping away. Max bristled at her side, pressing close, a low growl vibrating in his chest. "Easy, boy," Emily murmured, masking her own anxiety. She quickened her pace, scanning the shadows as they walked. When they reached the corner, she saw the truck again, parked near the woods, engine running, no one inside. By the time she finished the walk, it was gone. That night, Emily's dreams were restless. She awoke before dawn, heart racing, convinced she'd heard someone outside. She crept to the window, careful not to wake Max, and peered into the darkness. At first, she saw nothing but the moonlit yard. Then she noticed muddy footprints, fresh and unmistakable, leading up to the back fence and disappearing into the brush. The puppies slept soundly, curled up together, but Max was alert and restless. He prowled the house from window to window, finally settling near the back door with his chin on his paws, watching the yard as if daring danger to show itself. Emily's nerves stretched thin over the following days. She tried to stay busy, gardening, repainting the porch railings, walking the dogs on different routes. Still, the sense of unease never left her. She found herself double-checking the locks at night, pulling the curtains tighter. The comfort she'd worked so hard to build now felt precarious, like a bubble about to burst. At the animal hospital, while picking up more formula for the puppies, Emily pulled Dr. Taylor aside. He listened patiently, arms folded, his brow furrowed in concern, as she described the black truck, the muddy footprints, Max's behavior. "Have you noticed anyone suspicious? Anyone asking about the dogs?" Emily asked, her voice hushed. Dr. Taylor shook his head slowly. "No one out of the ordinary. But you did rescue those pups from a pretty bad situation. Sometimes people involved in that kind of thing don't like loose ends. Emily, you need to be careful." The warning made her stomach twist. Should I call the police? If you see something concrete, yes. In the meantime, take precautions. Keep your phone on you. Install a camera if you can. Don't take unnecessary risks, especially at night. Emily nodded, her resolve hardening. She bought a pair of motion-activated cameras at the hardware store on the way home, installing one at the front door and one covering the backyard. She set up alerts on her phone, then spent hours researching local animal rescue groups and reading about how to spot signs of animal abusers returning to reclaim their property. The word alone made her sick. At home, Emily tried to keep life normal for Max and the puppies. She forced herself to laugh at their antics, to join Lucas and Mrs. Harlow in the backyard for lemonade and stories. But beneath her smiles, her mind was always working, watching, waiting, preparing. Max seemed to sense the change. He was more protective than ever, never letting Emily out of his sight, barking at every unfamiliar noise. Sometimes, he would stand at the edge of the yard and stare into the trees, the old haunted look flickering back into his eyes. One afternoon, while Emily was hanging laundry on the line, Max let out a deep, guttural growl. She turned to see him rigid, staring at the fence. Emily dropped the basket and rushed over, heart pounding. Through the slats, she caught a glimpse of someone slipping away, a shadow melting into the woods. That night, Emily barely slept. She sat by the window, phone in hand, watching the feeds from her new cameras. Hours crawled by, but nothing moved except the wind and the occasional raccoon. But the next morning, as she made coffee, she found a scrap of paper shoved under her back gate. It was smeared with mud, the writing jagged. "You have something that's not yours." No signature, no explanation. But the message was clear. Emily's hands shook as she read it. She pressed the note to the table, forcing herself to breathe. Max nuzzled her leg, sensing her fear. She looked down at him, his eyes steady, determined, and felt a surge of anger burn through her fear. "No one is taking you away," she said quietly, kneeling to wrap her arms around his neck. "Not ever, I promise." She called Dr. Taylor that afternoon, voice tight but controlled. "They left a note," she said. "I'm scared, but I'm not backing down." "You're doing everything right, Emily. Keep the cameras rolling, keep Max close, and don't hesitate to call the sheriff if anything else happens. We'll help however we can." That evening, Mrs. Harlow brought over a casserole and sat with Emily at the kitchen table while the puppies tumbled around their feet. Lucas, sensing something was wrong, quietly took a seat beside Chance, stroking her soft fur. Emily looked at her small circle of allies and realized she wasn't truly alone. Not anymore. She drew strength from their presence, from Max's unwavering loyalty, from the tiny lives she'd saved. As night fell and the shadows grew long across the yard, Emily locked the doors, checked the cameras, and tucked the puppies in beside her bed. There was fear, yes, but also resolve. The world could be cruel and dangerous, but she had built a family worth fighting for, and she would stand her ground, no matter what. Outside, a pair of headlights flickered in the distance. Max stood at the window, his bandana bright against his dark fur, and let out a low, warning growl. Emily stood beside him, one hand on his back, her gaze steady. Whatever shadows returned from the past, they would face them together. The uneasy quiet of the previous night hung over Emily's home like a low fog, refusing to lift even as sunlight broke through the Vermont pines. Emily barely slept. Each time she closed her eyes, she heard the creak of the back gate, the scratch of branches, the menacing echo of that note. "You have something that's not yours." She kept replaying Dr. Taylor's words in her head. "Be vigilant, stay safe, don't hesitate to call for help." But there was no room for fear that morning. The puppies tumbled out of their basket, yipping and clambering over Max, who was already alert, ears pricked, nose twitching. He padded from window to door, as if checking every inch of the house, making sure his family was safe. Emily's chest tightened with gratitude and worry all at once. Max had been through enough, and now he was the first line of defense. She slipped the blue bandana a little tighter around his neck and knelt down beside him. "We're ready for whatever comes," she promised quietly, giving his ear a gentle rub. She tried to keep the morning routine normal, feeding the puppies, letting Max out into the yard, chatting with Mrs. Harlow, who brought over a loaf of cinnamon bread and her usual comforting presence. But when Emily looked through the kitchen window, she spotted the black pickup again, this time parked a block away. Its driver sat hunched over the wheel, watching the house with predatory patience. Emily's heart hammered. She grabbed her phone, snapping a quick photo through the window. Max was at her side in an instant, his body tense. Emily locked the doors and texted Dr. Taylor, then called the local sheriff, explaining about the note, the truck, and her growing fear. The dispatcher promised to send someone to patrol the area. By mid-afternoon, the puppies were napping and Lucas had come by to help play in the yard. The boy noticed Emily's tension and glanced at Max, who paced the fence line, never straying far from the porch. "Are the bad guys coming back?" Lucas asked, voice barely a whisper. Emily forced a smile. "I hope not, buddy, but if they do, we'll handle it, together." Mrs. Harlow, sharper than she let on, offered to stay for dinner and keep her cell phone handy. Emily was grateful. She called Dr. Taylor again, who insisted she keep the evidence, photos, the note, any camera footage, just in case. He offered to come by after his shift, but Emily told him to stay with his family for the evening. She could sense his worry through the line, and it gave her courage. The afternoon was tense. The pickup circled the block twice, always slow, always watching. Emily checked the backyard cameras, scanning for any movement. Max's anxiety was infectious. The puppies barked nervously, and even Chance, usually so brave, clung to Lucas for comfort. As dusk settled in, the air grew heavy, the stillness electric. Emily reheated Mrs. Harlow's casserole, forcing herself to eat. She kept her phone close, ringer on high, and made sure the back door was locked. Lucas's parents came to pick him up just as the last light faded. Mrs. Harlow squeezed Emily's hand and whispered, "Call me for anything, honey. Don't open the door for anyone you don't know." Emily nodded, her heart pounding. The house felt suddenly too large, the windows too exposed. She moved the puppy's basket into the living room and sat beside Max, stroking his fur as she checked the camera feeds once more. It happened just after 10 p.m., a soft scraping at the back fence. Max's head shot up, eyes locked on the darkness beyond the glass. Emily rose, adrenaline flooding her limbs. The camera alert pinged, a shadowy figure moving near the gate. Emily started recording video on her phone as she crept to the window. Two men, faces hidden under hoods, crouched by the fence, struggling with the latch. Max exploded into barking, a deep, furious sound that seemed to fill the entire house. Emily dialed 911, her voice low but urgent as she explained the situation. "They're here. They're trying to break in. Please hurry." The dispatcher promised officers were on their way. Max stood between Emily and the door, his body rigid, every muscle ready to spring. The puppies whimpered, huddled together in their basket. A sudden crash. The men forced open the gate and rushed into the yard. Max leapt to the door, barking with a ferocity Emily had never heard before. She hit the record button on her phone and pointed it at the window, capturing the men's faces, their threats, the violence in their posture. "Give us the dogs and nobody gets hurt," one man shouted, pounding on the glass. "They belong to us." Emily's hands shook, but her voice was steady. "The police are coming. I have you on video. Leave now, or you'll regret it." Max pressed himself between Emily and the door, growling, teeth bared, his body a wall of protection. The men hesitated, just for a second, then tried to break the door open. Emily's heart slammed in her chest. She screamed for help, her voice echoing down the street. A light flicked on in Mrs. Harlow's house next door. Her silhouette appeared at the window, phone to her ear. Lucas's parents ran out onto their porch, shouting for the intruders to stop. Lights snapped on all up and down the street as neighbors emerged, drawn by the commotion and Emily's cries. The men, realizing they were no longer hidden, panicked. One ran for the fence, scrambling over it in desperation. The other lingered, shouting curses, But Max lunged at the door, teeth flashing. The man bolted. Moments later, sirens wailed down the block. 2 sheriff's cruisers screeched to a stop outside Emily's house. Officers rushed into the yard, weapons drawn. Emily flung open the door, video still rolling. "They tried to break in. Threatened me. Wanted the dogs," she gasped, showing the officers her phone. The officers separated Emily and Max from the puppies, making sure everyone was safe. They quickly swept the area, catching one of the men as he tried to flee through a neighbor's backyard. The other was caught half an hour later, hiding under a parked truck down the street. Inside the house, Emily sat with the puppies, her body trembling, tears streaming down her face. Not from fear, but from relief. Max pressed against her, licking her cheek, tail wagging softly. The sheriff, reviewing Emily's footage and the note, shook his head. "You did the right thing. This is clear evidence of animal cruelty and trespassing. You're safe now, and you helped stop something much bigger." Neighbors drifted over, offering blankets, hot tea, and words of comfort. Emily looked around at the circle of faces, at Max and the puppies, at Mrs. Harlow standing guard at the door, and felt something shift inside her. Fear had brought the community together. Max's courage, her own resolve, and the love of her friends had kept them safe. That night, Emily lay on the living room floor with Max and the puppies, finally able to close her eyes without dread. Outside, the sirens faded, replaced by the gentle sound of voices and laughter as neighbors lingered, making sure she would never be alone again. For the first time, Emily realized she wasn't just a survivor. She was a protector, too. And so was Max. Together, they had stood their ground. The days after the attempted break-in passed in a whirlwind of police visits, paperwork, and neighbors stopping by to check on Emily and her little family. It was as if the entire town of Maple Creek had collectively decided that Emily Carter's house was now a symbol of courage, and that Max, the once terrified German shepherd, was their unlikely hero. After the sheriff took their statements and made sure the men were safely in custody, Emily found herself surrounded by more support than she'd ever known. Mrs. Harlow baked pies and brought over fresh bread. Lucas's parents offered to reinforce the backyard fence, and even Dr. Taylor showed up with a toolbox and a broad, reassuring smile. "You can never be too careful," he said, hammering new locks onto the doors and securing the windows himself. The local animal rescue group sent cards, food, and volunteers. Some brought treats for Max and toys for the puppies. Others arrived with bouquets of wildflowers or simply words of kindness. Neighbors Emily had only waved to before now lingered over coffee and cake, telling her how proud they were of her bravery and how inspired they felt by her story. The house was still small, the puppies still loud and messy, but the loneliness that had once pressed against Emily's heart was finally gone, washed away by the wave of community that now surrounded her. One bright Saturday morning, Dr. Taylor returned to check on the puppies. By now they had grown sturdy and mischievous, their eyes bright, their tails wagging so fiercely they could barely keep their balance. The smallest, Chance, had become the favorite of nearly everyone who visited. She was still delicate, her legs thin and awkward, but she ran faster than her siblings, barked louder, and, most of all, never left Max's side. Emily sat on the porch, watching as Chance scrambled onto Max's back, determined to keep up with her family. Lucas laughed, racing alongside them, while Mrs. Harlow watched with her usual gentle pride. Dr. Taylor turned to Emily, a smile creasing the corners of his eyes. "They're all healthy," he said, kneeling to scratch Max behind the ears. "Especially this little miracle." He nodded at Chance, who rolled onto her back in the grass, paws waving in the air. Emily felt a lump form in her throat. "Thank you for everything," she said quietly. "You did this, Emily. All of it." Dr. Taylor looked at her with genuine admiration. "And I think it's time to make things official." He produced a sheaf of adoption papers, already filled out for Emily to sign. "If you want them all," he said, "they're yours, forever." Emily didn't hesitate. She signed her name in looping letters, feeling tears of relief and happiness welling in her eyes. Max, as if sensing the moment, trotted over and rested his head in her lap. She looped her arms around his neck, whispering, "You're home now, for good." Word spread quickly. Emily Carter had adopted not just Max, but all the puppies as well. When the paperwork was finalized, the local animal rescue group came by with balloons and a giant dog-shaped cake for a little backyard celebration. Lucas and his parents, Mrs. Harlow, Dr. Taylor and his wife, and nearly a dozen neighbors filled Emily's yard with laughter and warmth. Max wore his blue bandana, now freshly washed and bright as the morning sky, and the puppies darted from guest to guest, collecting cuddles and scraps of food. Chance, the bravest of the bunch, was officially given her name at the party. Lucas announced it with pride, lifting her high in the air as the guests applauded. "She's called Chance because she almost didn't make it, but she never gave up," he shouted. Emily smiled, her heart so full it felt fragile. She knew her life would never be the same. The puppies she had risked everything for were now the center of her world. And Max, the dog who had saved them all, was no longer just a rescue, but the spirit of her home. As the days turned to weeks, Emily and Max found themselves more and more involved in the community. The story of the rescue and the bravery shown that night had become something of a legend in Maple Creek. Soon, the local animal rescue invited Emily and Max to join a program for therapy dogs, a group that visited schools, nursing homes, and libraries to help children and adults learn about trust, healing, and kindness. Max, once shy and haunted, now trotted confidently through classrooms, bandana gleaming. Children flocked to him, listening as Emily shared his story, how he'd been afraid, how he'd protected his family, how he'd learned to trust again. Max would sit quietly, tail thumping, as little hands stroked his fur and teachers beamed at the lessons unfolding. Chance quickly became a star as well. She might have been the runt, but her spirit was boundless. When Max visited a children's reading circle at the library, Chance was right beside him, curling into laps, dozing off during story time. Lucas, proud as ever, volunteered to help walk the puppies after school and even gave short presentations to his class about animal rescue, responsibility, and courage. Emily found herself changed, too. The anxiety and sadness that had shadowed her after the divorce faded, replaced by a new sense of belonging and purpose. Her days were busy and sometimes exhausting, but each was filled with meaning. She organized a small Paws and People group with other local dog owners, leading walks and hosting playdates. Max's blue bandana became a symbol for their growing network of animal lovers, a badge of hope, healing, and second chances. One afternoon, as Emily sat on the porch, she realized she could barely remember what it felt like to be alone. Her yard was alive with laughter and barks. Neighbors strolled by to wave hello. Mrs. Harlow read on the porch swing, while Chance napped at her feet, and Lucas played fetch with the other puppies under the wide Vermont sky. As the sun set behind the trees, Max curled beside Emily, pressing his head gently into her lap. She stroked his fur, gazing at the house that was now more than a home. It was a haven, a second chance not just for her, but for everyone who stepped inside. In that golden light, with Max at her side and her family gathered around, Emily knew that the pain and fear of the past had been replaced by something stronger. They had all been rescued, each in their own way, and together, they'd found what they needed most: a new name, a new family, and the promise of happiness that only comes from choosing to love again and again. Late summer in Maple Creek brought cooler nights and a hush that seemed to settle over the world as the sun sank below the tree line. The rescue's chaos had faded, replaced by a gentle, humming rhythm. Puppies romping in the grass, Max basking on the porch, neighbors stopping by for a story or a quick scratch behind a furry ear. But beneath this surface calm, Emily was aware of another change, subtler but deeper, moving through the quiet spaces of her life like the breeze through the leaves. Healing was happening, slowly, sometimes invisibly, but always forward. One evening, as twilight painted the sky lavender and gold, Emily sat by her living room window with a journal in her lap and a mug of tea cooling on the sill. Max rested at her feet, his head heavy on her toes. The puppies, now approaching the threshold of young dogs, slept in a sun-warmed tangle on their favorite blanket. Every so often one would twitch or grunt in a dream, and Max would lift his head, ears cocked, always ready to reassure. Emily's pen moved slowly across the page. She had started writing at Dr. Taylor's encouragement, first as a way to process the trauma, but now as something more, a record of transformation, a letter to herself, and in some ways, to anyone who needed hope. Tonight her thoughts were clear. Healing is a journey, not a finish line, she wrote, pausing to watch the flicker of fireflies on the lawn. Both Max and I carry scars. His, the kind you can see in the way he still flinches at sudden movement or loud sounds. Mine, less visible but just as real. Sometimes I wake up from anxious dreams, convinced that the past is back to steal what I love. But every day we move forward, a little stronger, a little braver. She closed her eyes and listened to the house, the rhythmic whir of the ceiling fan, the gentle snore of a puppy, Max's even breath. It had taken time, real, hard time, for trust to grow here. Max, though now the hero of their little world, still struggled. When a stranger entered the house, he'd hover protectively beside Emily, stiff with old fear. When a truck rumbled down the street, he'd stand between the puppies and the window, eyes narrowed, body ready to defend. But there were victories too. The day Max allowed Lucas's father to pet him for the first time, everyone cheered. When Emily tried letting Max off-leash at the park, she nearly cried as he raced in wild circles and then, heart-pounding, returned to her when called. The first time Emily handed over puppy-sitting duties to Mrs. Harlow so she could attend a town meeting alone, she stood outside the door for a full minute before realizing she trusted her neighbors and herself enough to walk away, even if only for a little while. Trauma does not define us, Emily wrote, her hands steady now. Max is not just a rescued dog. He's a protector, a teacher for children, a friend. I'm not just a divorced woman or a failed wife. I'm part of something bigger, a leader in my own small way, and a believer in second chances. There were still days when the shadows crept in. Sometimes, Emily would wake to the sound of a storm and remember that night when everything almost fell apart. She'd find Max sitting in the hallway, eyes wide, every muscle tense. On those nights, she'd sit with him, whispering quietly, "We're safe now. We have each other. That's enough." Trust, she realized, was not a one-time thing. It was built in moments, choices, and daily acts. With the puppies, trust was a soft hand and a gentle word. With neighbors, It was a knock on the door and an offer to help. With Max, it was patience. Never forcing, never rushing, always waiting for him to decide. Yes, I'm ready. Community is more than geography, Emily wrote, looking up as Lucas ran past the window, a puppy trailing behind him. It's the people who show up when you need them most. Mrs. Harlow with her casseroles and quiet wisdom. Lucas with his laughter and simple faith. Dr. Taylor with his steady hands and endless encouragement. By letting them in, by asking for help, I multiplied my own strength. Alone, I could have gotten lost. Together, we created something new, a family by choice, not by blood. She thought of all the lives touched by Max's rescue. The children at the school who hugged him and told him their secrets. The neighbors who now left food and toys on her porch. Just because. The town, forever changed by the courage shown that night, now more aware, more compassionate, more willing to act. Compassion ripples outward, Emily wrote, smiling as Max nuzzled her hand. By stopping on that lonely road, by choosing to care, I didn't just change my life. I inspired others to see, to act, to heal. Maybe that's the real miracle. As dusk faded tonight, Emily closed her journal and reached for Max, drawing him close. He relaxed, his trust in her complete. The puppies stirred, one by one, coming to rest at her feet and Max's side. Emily knew that there would be more hard days, more moments when old pain returned. But she also knew, with absolute certainty, that they would face those moments together. She looked around her house, once empty, now overflowing with life and love, and felt a sense of peace she hadn't known in years. Chosen family, she realized, was the truest kind. In this small town, on this ordinary night, Emily Carter, Max, and their unlikely family had not only survived, but thrived. The lesson was simple but profound. Healing doesn't mean erasing scars. It means finding joy again, building trust one moment at a time, and letting love, messy, complicated, unconditional, lead the way. The first cool evenings of autumn brought a new kind of energy to Maple Creek. Leaves turned gold and crimson, swirling on the wind, and the air was crisp with promise. In Emily's backyard, fairy lights strung from tree to tree cast a gentle glow over the grass, where neighbors gathered for a celebration unlike any the town had ever seen. A party not just for the animals, but for every heart that had chosen to care. Emily stood at the center of it all, a little stunned by the transformation. Tables groaned with homemade food. Casseroles, pies, pumpkin bread, and fresh cider. Children chased the puppies, now young dogs, between the folding chairs, their laughter ringing above the music drifting from a neighbor's old radio. Lucas, grinning, darted after Chance, who zipped and dodged with a speed that would have seemed impossible just a few months ago. Max was the guest of honor. His blue bandana gleamed beneath the string lights, and he moved from group to group with the confidence of a true hero. Elderly couples knelt to scratch his ears. Children hugged him, whispering their own hopes and secrets. Even people who had once avoided that rescue dog now spoke his name with pride. And Max, ever watchful, made sure to check in with Emily at regular intervals, pressing his nose against her hand, as if to say, "We did it." As the sky darkened and the fire pit crackled, Emily felt herself welling up with gratitude. She'd spent so much of her life waiting for things to get better, to feel less alone, to find a place where she belonged. Now, standing among friends and family, chosen and found, she knew she had all she'd ever needed. And it all started with one act of compassion, one decision not to look away. When everyone had eaten their fill and the puppies, tired from too much play, had flopped in a contented heap near the fire, Mrs. Harlow called the group to attention. "Emily," she said, voice warm and clear. "Would you share your story? I think there's a few folks here who still haven't heard it straight from you." Emily felt a flush rise to her cheeks, but as Max sat beside her, she drew strength from his steady presence. She stood on the porch steps, looking out at the faces of people who had become her world. She began softly, her voice gathering confidence with each word. "I never expected my life to change because of a dog," she started, smiling down at Max. "And I never imagined I'd find family in a storm, or courage in the middle of fear. But one night, alone on a dark road, I saw Max begging for help. I almost kept driving. I think most of us would have. But something in his eyes told me that if I didn't stop, maybe nobody would. And I couldn't let that be the end of his story." She paused, remembering the wild fear, the heartbreak in the old shed, the tiny bodies fighting to live. "Rescuing Max and the puppies was the hardest thing I've ever done, but it was also the most important. They needed me, and, as it turned out, I needed them even more. They reminded me that compassion isn't just a feeling. It's a choice, a risk even, an action that you take, especially when it would be easier to walk away." She looked around at the circle of neighbors, Mrs. Harlow, Lucas, Dr. Taylor, and all the others who had come running when she needed help, who had chosen to act too. What started as one small act of kindness has changed my life, and, I think, changed this whole community. Because when you choose to care, really care, you invite others to do the same. The ripples spread farther than you can imagine. She let the words settle, seeing her own emotions reflected in the faces before her. Max isn't just a rescued dog. He's a protector, a friend, a teacher. He's a therapy dog now, helping kids learn about trust and healing. And those puppies? Each one has found a home right here, with the people who stepped up when it mattered most. I've learned that family isn't always what you're born into. Sometimes it's what you build together through trust, patience, and a little bit of courage. Applause rose, gentle at first, then growing as neighbors wiped at their eyes and clapped Max on the back. Lucas ran to hug Emily's legs, Chance trailing behind, and for a moment Emily closed her eyes, letting herself soak in the warmth of belonging. After the party, when the yard had emptied and the lights twinkled alone in the cool air, Emily lingered on the porch with Max at her feet. She thought about the months that had passed, the pain she'd survived, and the joy she'd found in unexpected places. She thought of all the small moments, each bottle fed to a shivering puppy, every step Max took toward trust, every neighbor who knocked to offer help, and realized that healing wasn't about erasing scars. It was about learning to live with them, to grow around them, and to find joy anyway. She reached down, running her fingers along Max's soft fur. "We're okay," she whispered. "We're really okay." In the weeks that followed, Emily found herself called on more and more to share her story. At rescue fundraisers, school assemblies, even at church gatherings, she spoke about second chances and the ways compassion could transform not just one life, but many. Max, now famous in town, always wore his blue bandana, his presence reassuring and calm, a living reminder that no one was too broken to be loved. Her home became a haven, not just for animals in need, but for people too. Strangers knocked on her door, seeking advice, comfort, or simply to meet the dog who had inspired so much hope. Emily welcomed them all. She cooked, she listened, she offered what help she could, and always, she tried to pass forward the same compassion that had once saved her. Emily's story, her legacy, became a reminder to everyone in Maple Creek. Compassion is not just emotion, it's action, even when inconvenient or scary. Chosen family, built on trust, patience, and mutual care, can heal wounds fate and cruelty leave behind. Healing never means erasing scars, but learning to grow around them and find joy again. By helping one creature, we often end up saving ourselves and inspire others to do the same. Sometimes, the smallest act of kindness becomes the turning point in more lives than you will ever know. And so, in the heart of Vermont, under autumn skies, Emily, Max, and their chosen family lived on. Every day a new chance to protect, to heal, and to love. Their story had begun in darkness, but it bloomed into something bright enough to light the way for others.